Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Tzadi Vav continues the Gemara's discussion of various sizes of holes in a Kli Cheres and what each size affects the Kli halachically. That'll take us to the end of the 10th parak of Masech Shabbos, and we will preview the 11th when we get up there. So first of all, the Gemara is now quoting a number of different statements by different people, Tanaim and Amoraim, about the halachic significance of various different levels of hole sizes in a Kli Cheres. So first of all, we begin with Rav Asi, who says that he has a brisa, which says that the minimum size that affects a real full whole Kli Cheres, earthenware Kli, is if it is a large enough hole for water to get into the Kli through that. If it's smaller than that, meaning it's only large enough for water to be able to get out, that is only significant for a broken piece of Cheres. Now, a broken piece of Cheres is useful to catch water sometimes, but if it has a tiny hole in it that lets water drip out, then it's useless and it's garbage and it has no halacha. It has no significant halacha, because nobody's going to bring another Kli to catch the drips from a broken Kli. You have a broken Kli with a hole in it, you'll just throw it out. If, however, you have a normal full Kli and it has a tiny hole in it, then you'll just bring another broken Kli to put under it to catch the drips. You won't throw out that Kli itself. Now, Ul says there's a machlokes Amoraim between Rabbi Yossi bar Rav Avin and Rabbi Yossi bar Rav Zavda as to what the minimum size hole is to make a Kli Cheres be considered to be a flower pot with a hole in it, so that the plant in it is connected to the ground and it is not tamei. And the size that they have are not sizes near each other. It's the size of a small root. That's a very small size. The next size up from that would be an olive, but that's not the other opinion. The other opinion is the size large enough to let a pomegranate out. So the Gemara says you have a siman to remember that their sizes are far apart and not near each other, and the siman is Echad Hamar B'Echad Hamamit, which is a quote of a brisa in Menachos, which says Echad Hamar B'Echad Hamamit V'Vachi Chavidi B'Lashem Shemayim. So here you see that there's a marb and there's a mamit here. There's a big size and a small size, but we don't take the middle size. Now the next size up from that is Rav Chinan or Rav Kahana in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that if it's the size that allows an olive to fall out, there's actually an in-between size, but it's the next halacha, if it allows an olive to fall out, then it is a big enough hole to make the Kli itself tahor. It is considered broken, and its tumah falls off, as is the halacha with Kli Cheres. When it's broken, it's not tamei, because its material has no value. Now, the Gemara adds, Mark Shisha Brei de Rabba adds in the name of Rabbi Eliezer that when it's broken to that state, it cannot be makabel tumah at all. It has the status of a Kli made out of waste material or stones or earth, which is not makabel tumah at all under any circumstances, not midaraisa and not midarabbanan. Now the last halacha for Kli Cheres is if it is in a house with tumah in it, and the tumah needs to try to get in through a hole. So it can't get in through any hole. It can only get in through a hole which is equal to a mouth, which is a mouth of the Kli. So if the Kli has a lid on it, the tumah can't get in. The only way that it can get in afterwards is if the lid breaks to the stage where the majority of the lid is missing. This is the end of Parak HaMatzniah. Now we begin Parak HaZorek, the 11th Parak of Masech Shabbos. HaZorek begins with the Mishnah, which returns to the halachos of carrying an object or transferring it from one rishos to another on Shabbos. So first of all, the Mishnah is going to focus on the halachos of throwing an object or passing it from hand to hand. So the Mishnah says as follows: if you throw an object from a rishos haram to a rishos hayachid or vice versa, it's an ester d'oraisa. If you throw an object from a rishos hayachid to another rishos hayachid, that is not aser. If you throw an object from one rishos hayachid to another rishos hayachid and there is a rishos harabim in between, like for example, you have a porch on one side of the street and a porch on the other side of the street, and you throw from one porch to the other, So the Mishnah says there's a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva who says that you are chayv, that it is an Isser D'Oraisa, and the Chachamim who say it's not. Now the Mishnah proceeds to explain, and it's not clear which opinion the Mishnah is explaining, but it says that if you throw it from a porch on one side of the street to a porch on the other side of the street, it's not Asr. Any type of throwing is not Asr, or it's not an Isser D'Oraisa. The only problem is when you pass from hand to hand, and it's from two porches near each other on the same side of the street. Why? Because passing from hand to hand, from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah, with the Rosh Hashanah in between, was performed in the construction of the Mishkan in one way only, and only in those specific conditions, where you're not going across Rosh Hashanah, you're going alongside Rosh Hashanah, even though Rosh Hashanah does pass between you, but it's on the side of Rosh Hashanah, not across the width of it. And that was when the Leviim would load up the walls of the Mishkan onto the wagons. So there was two Leviim, one in each wagon, and they passed the wall from hand to hand. It wasn't thrown because it was too heavy, and it was on the side of Rosh Hashanah, not across it. Therefore, the only way that one can be in violation of the Isser D'Oraisa of carrying when he is passing from a Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah is if he is passing from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah along the side of Rosh Hashanah with Rosh Hashanah in the space between them, and it's passed by hand and not being thrown. The Gemara begins by trying to find the source of the Isser of throwing an object through Rosh Hashanah at all. And the Gemara will begin by defining what the source of the Isser of carrying altogether is. They'll first discuss carrying from Rosh Hashanah out to Rosh Hashanah, then carrying in from Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara will explain why one is called an Av and one is called a Tolda, and then we're going to search for the source of throwing. So first of all, the Gemara says, how do you know that there's an Isser to carry altogether? Where do you see that anywhere in the Psukim? So the Gemara says, because the Pasuk says that Moshe told the people to stop bringing things for the Mishkan. Why did he do that? Because it was Shabbos, and he told them, don't bring things from your tents, which are Rosh Hashanah, to where Moshe was, which was Machane Leviah, which was crowded, and therefore is a Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, hold that. Who says that has anything to do with Shabbos? First of all, who says it was on Shabbos? Second of all, it wasn't because it wasn't appropriate to carry then, it was because they had enough. That's why he said to stop bringing. So the Gemara says, no, but there's a hekesh, there's the same word appears here, and in the discussion of Yom Kippur, where it says, Vayaviru kol b'machane, Yom Kippur says, Vahavarta shofar teruah, just like over there, it was forbidden to do it on the day. Here also it's forbidden to do it on the day, and that's the source that is forbidden to carry. Okay, now the Gemara says, how do you know that you're not allowed to carry reversed? From Rishos Harabim into Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara says it's logical. The problem with carrying is transferring from Rishos to Rishos. Why would I think that it's different which way you're going? So the Gemara says, okay, fine, great, I'll accept that, but why is that called a tolda? Why is carrying into Rosh Hashanah called a tolda, and carrying out is called an av? So the Gemara says it's very important to know what's an av and what's a tolda. The fact that it's a tolda of the av means that if you were to do both of them in one period of forgetfulness on Shabbos, you'd only have to bring one korban chatas, because it's the same category. It's an av and it's tolda. If it would be called separate avos, then you would have to bring two korbanos, one for each activity. And the Gemara says, okay, but what about according to Rabbi Elazar, who holds that you do have to bring two separate korbanos for an av and a tolda, even though they're in the same category? What is the significance of calling one an av and one a tolda? The Gemara says there's no real halachic significance, but the one which was actually done in the Mishkan is considered to be more significant, and that's called the Av, and the one that's just similar to that is called a Tolda. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to throwing. So first of all, how do we know that throwing is asur? So before we do that, we introduce a Mishnah which discusses a little bit of the halachas of throwing. So it says if you throw an object and it sticks to a wall, if it sticks above 10 tvachim, then it's like it froze in the Makam Petor. It never landed in a Rishos Harabim, because above 10 Tvachim is not a Rishos Harabim, therefore you didn't violate an Isser D'Oraisa. If, however, it sticks to the wall below 10 Tvachim, it's the same as if it landed on the floor, and it's an Isser D'Oraisa, just like you threw an object 4 amos through Rishos Harabim and it landed. Now the question is, where do we see this halacha, that throwing an object 4 amos in Rishos Harabim is asur? Later, the Gemara will ask even carrying 4 amas. So first, the Gemara tries a few sources here. So first of all, the Gemara says because the people who were weaving the yiriyos, the curtains, the walls, the drapes for the ceiling, in the Mishkan, they threw their needles from one to the other, that they should be able to share them. So the Gemara says, well, first of all, people who weave don't use needles. So the Gemara says, yeah, okay, so not the weavers, it was the sewers. So the Gemara says, okay, so how do you know that they had to throw the needles to each other? Maybe they passed it nicely to each other. The Gemara says, no, they couldn't be sitting near each other, because then when they stretched out their hands to pull the thread taut, they would interfere with each other. They would knock into each other. The Gemara says, okay, so maybe they sat an amma apart. How do you know they sat 4 ammas apart? Where does that assumption derive it from? So the Gemara says, okay, we'll accept that it wasn't the sewers with the needles, it was the weavers who were throwing the spool of thread to each other. As they passed the spool of thread back and forth to weave the yiriyos were 4 ammas wide, so they had to, right, we know that, so they had to throw the spool across the 4 ammas. That's the source. They had 2 people standing on either side, and the way they passed the thread back and forth was by throwing the spool. So the Mishnah says that doesn't count as throwing, because the person who threw it is still holding on to the thread. So he hasn't let go of it. That wouldn't be an issur of throwing. That's not carrying on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, okay, but what about the end of the spool and the last throw? So the thread wasn't held onto it anymore. The spool flew off. So that was where he threw it 4 ammas. So the Gemara says that's no good, because when they threw it across the top of the cloth that they were weaving, and therefore was a makam patur. It's not a Rosh Hashanah, so that can't be the source. So the Gemara says, okay, so I'll tell you what. When they shared the spools, they would lend each other their spools, and they would throw it to each other. So the Gemara says, again, how do you know that they sat 4 ammas apart? Maybe they sat right near each other. Maybe they sat back to back. So Gemara says, no, they couldn't sit back to back. They would knock into each other as they were trying to work. As they stretched the spool to draw the thread, they would hit each other. So Gemara says, okay, maybe they staggered a little. They didn't sit back to back. They sat slightly off center. So Gemara says, and there's another problem. Besides for that, they didn't lend each other anything. The Brisa says, quoting the pasuk, Ish Ishmi Malachta Shehema Oisim, everybody had their own tools, nobody had to lend anything to anyone else. So there was no lending going on. And another problem, a third problem, these are all good sources for throwing, maybe, let's say, but we didn't even learn that carrying an object 4 ammas through Rosh Hashanah is a problem. So how do you know that why are we even trying to figure out throwing? So the Gemara says, okay, all these things, all passing 4 ammas, throwing 4 ammas, all these things are halach l'Moshe b'Sinai. It was given to Moshe and Har Sinai. It's not derived from any specific psukim. Okay, that ends that discussion. The Gemara now launches a related discussion, which is what is the sin of the Mekoshesh Eitim and who was he? Mekoshesh Eitim was a person who was given the death penalty by stoning when the Jewish people, Klal Yisrael, were in the Midbar. So he had violated Shabbos by collecting wood, Mekoshesh Eitim. So the Gemara says, what did he do exactly? What was the malacha involved in collecting wood? The Gemara says, Rav Yehuda Mishmuel says he had carried the wood 4 ammas in Rosh Hashanah. He didn't do anything else. Now we have a Brisa that has 3 opinions as to what he did. Rav Acha bar Yaakov said that he was gathering up scattered wood. That's an Isser of Ma'amer, gathering. And the Tanakama there of the Brisa says it was Toile, she had cut the wood off of where it was growing. So we have 3 opinions as to what malacha he did exactly. Now the Gemara says, why is this significant? Why is this important? And the Gemara quotes the statement of Rav. Rav says he found amongst the hidden scrolls of Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia had a number of scrolls where he took notes of halachos that he learned, and they were hidden because it was forbidden to write halachos for the public. One was only allowed to for his own notes. but Rav, who was Rav Chia's nephew, had found them. And in these notes, he found that Isi ben Yehuda said that there are 39 malachos of Shabbos, and if you do all of them, you only have to bring one carbon. And we have a problem, because we learned otherwise. We learned that there are 39, and the reason why the number 39 is given, Rabbi Yechanan says, is to tell you that you can actually bring 39 separate karbanos for each of them, one for each of them. So Gemara explains what he means when he says that you only bring one, is he meant that there is one that you don't bring. Meaning there is one of these 39 malachos that does not have the Isser Chatas attached to it, and if you were to do it on purpose, you wouldn't get skila. So there's one malacha out there, this is what we need, there's one malacha out there of the 39 that doesn't carry the punishment of stoning. So Gemara says, the machlokas between these three Tanaim was, which one can we definitely say has the punishment of stoning, because they stoned the Makoshesh. So which one is it? The other ones, we aren't sure, but Rabbi Yehuda said that certainly carrying is certainly stoning, and Rabbi Yaakov said that gathering is certainly stoning, and the Tanakama had said that cutting off is certainly stoning. So that's what this machlokes is about. The Gemara now addresses who the Makoshesh was. Who was the person who gathered up the wood? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva says that it was tzalafchad. This is a brisa. How do you know? So he says there is the same phrase is used in two separate psukim, the one about tzalafchad and the one about the Makoshesh. About tzalafchad, the daughters came and said, Avinu meis b'midbar. And by the Makoshesh it says, Vayu b'nei Yisrael b'midbar. So you see a link between the two, and therefore the Makoshesh was none other than tzalafchad himself. Now, Rabbi Yehuda ben Mseira said to him, Akiva, this is a terrible thing you're doing. If you're right, so then what business do you have revealing who he was? The Torah hid his identity, and you're busy publicizing it. And if you're wrong, so then you're speaking Moshe Shemra and scattering tales about a tzaddik like tzalafchad. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? What do you mean the Torah hid it? There's a clear Gzeira Shava. That's as if it is spelled out. The Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda ben Mseira didn't have this Gzeira Shava. He didn't have such a Messiah, and therefore he didn't agree with it.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.